Well, hey there, and thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Conversate. Unfortunately, we had a technical difficulty again and recorded our video in the wrong file format, and it just won't play. So you get an audio-only version today. You don't get to see Pastor Kevin and myself, Pastor Aaron. However, you do get to hear us engage in this conversation about discipleship, both being disciples and making disciples. So here goes. Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, I, Aaron Gerke, am joined once again by my friend and partner in ministry, Kevin Bender, and we are talking all things discipleship. So our theme this week is Follow Me, Go and Be Disciples and Disciple Makers. A lot of you may be familiar with those terms, but for some of you, it may be new terminology. And so we're going to talk through these things again and talk about our own journeys with discipleships and the joys and struggles. We really hope you enjoy it. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Aaron.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, man.
Yeah, well, thanks for being gone so I could chat with Bryant last week.
Yeah, that was great, man. I listened to your chat with Bryant.
Did you?
Yeah, it was that was quite the tale about the bike.
Oh my
bike
goodness!
Experience.
I know. Yeah, there was a lot that could be said, or a lot that could be said about this whole. I mean, the image tied in really well from this following to Bryant paying for my rental bike. You know, I mean. Yeah, the story can preach itself, I think, you know, so, yeah, it was fun. You've done some mountain biking, haven't you?
A little bit. I've gone, well, I guess before I moved up here, I went, like, trail biking, mountain biking twice with some friends from Camp Luther.
Okay.
And then, had a bike generously lent to me last summer, used it twice, got really sore both times I went. And it's got a flat tire now.
Oh, no.
So I got to sort that out and get back on the trails.
You should. We could go together.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. Yeah, so you and your family took a short little vacay, I think, kind of. Saw some family and stuff. So, yeah, it's good to have you back in town.
Yeah, good to be back.
Awesome.
And last week you were talking to Bryant because you were in the topic of discipleship, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the podcast maybe we jumped the gun a couple of times. I mean, we're doing the sermon series, right? Follow me, go and be. So that very first week was just kind of in this concept of we're trying to set the stage about the fact that Jesus says, "Follow me," and while following Jesus, we have the opportunity to be His people and live according to the commands He's given to us. And I think it's just an important. I think the reason that we're doing the sermon series and we're going to carry this theme through is I feel like a lot of people forget the last part of the Great Commission where Jesus says, "I will be with you always."
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think, okay, Jesus said go and make disciples, and now it's just like I'm all on my own. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know how to do this. I mean, Jesus, why'd you leave me with this task? But the reality is that Jesus actually goes before us into these places. He's already working in the hearts and the minds of the people that we will communicate with this day. The people that we will interact with. He's already working in all those spots. So that's why he says, follow me first, right? And as we follow him, then we have the opportunities to be his people, and we'll be more attuned to those opportunities the more that we follow Jesus. I think we'll be less attuned to the opportunities if we think that we got to do it all by ourselves, because then we'll be overwhelmed and we'll think, I can't do this, and then we'll just kind of sink back into
our own devices, maybe even the way, even if we were to take the task super seriously, and just even if it was this overwhelming weight, just be like, I gotta shoulder it. I feel like the approach that we would have with others, like who we would want to share Jesus with, probably wouldn't really be like the best approach.
Yeah.
Right? Because
What are you thinking? Like a used car salesman approach?
Yeah, used car salesman, or I mean, I think back in the day there was some kind of like pretty intense, like, hey, if you were to die tonight, what are you gonna be? Yeah. It's kind of like, oh, geez. Yeah. like fear tactics. Yeah. I don't know if used car salesmen use fear tactics. Probably. Like, you gotta take advantage right now. Yeah. You're gonna regret it. Yeah. And I mean, certainly there's that sense, there's that urgency of the Great Commission. But I think when it comes to the manner in which we share Jesus, it never has to be something of, like, it's not compulsion.
No.
Right?
I mean, Jesus sells himself.
Yeah. Right. It's a product you can get behind.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first week, just this kind of concept of follow me, Jesus says, and as you're following me, I'll open up these doors for these opportunities. And now each week through the sermon series, we're adding a tagline or a topic or a place, at the end of, follow me, go and be, fill in the blank. And so this first one is go and be disciples and disciple makers. Mm-hmm. And I think on this podcast, I mean, we've been talking about discipleship. I think those of you who have been listening have picked up on these themes, over and over again. And so in my sermon, I kind of started in this place of, talking about how I have a discipler and I've been discipling people and we've had this discipleship group. But then I intentionally stopped and said, well, let me just slow down for a minute, because some of you are even wondering, like, all right, I don't even know what the word disciple means.
When I hear the word disciple, I generally think those 12 guys who hung around with Jesus.
And that's even because you were raised in the church.
Yeah, right.
You have at least got a basic biblical knowledge. Somebody in the world has no idea even about
who those guys are. Yeah, and even for me, I'm still keeping that word kind of long in the past, like associated with those individuals. Oh. Not necessarily for
like
myself.
A present day.
Yeah, or a present day term. Oh. I mean, I don't really use the word disciple in any other context or conversation generally.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say the same. I mean, like, I have been discipled for the last almost 5 years now. I've been trying to put this into practice in my own life, and it's only finally like starting to feel like natural, like, oh, this is a word I can use and put into practice, Mm-hmm. And I've been trying really hard to put into practice and talk about it a lot. So I can imagine there's quite a learning curve there. But speaking of the word learning, that's exactly what the word disciple means, a learner. And I had somebody after church on Sunday say, it's a very faithful Christian person that said, she said, I've struggled to understand this concept of disciple. I mean, the same way that we're saying, like, she just said, I didn't really know how, I don't know how to apply it, but when you said it meant learner, and you gave that example of teacher and student, that it totally makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Now I get it,
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm glad we slowed down and did some of that, but I think that bears repeating throughout this, sermon series. Just disciple means learner.
Yeah, well, even for me, like, when you broke it down in your sermon, like, I don't know that learner was, like, if someone told me to define a disciple, again, I think I probably would have said something like, well, it's someone who, like, followed Jesus, but that's still kind of ambiguous instead of, this more specific learner, And so that's kind of nice. I like that. That definition's helpful in understanding what a disciple is. And it also makes a little more sense of then what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like any other learner, I gotta learn.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I made that connection also intentionally in the sermon, like, it's not just head knowledge, mm-hmm. right? It's not just learning information. It's actually doing something with it,
mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know how I got there, but last night I was watching a YouTube video of this guy and his wife building a little cabin on their property,
mm-hmm.
and it was like a how-to video. I mean, I really want to go build a cabin now. I don't know that I have the property to, I don't have any property to build a cabin. on. But so it's one thing to just like I now know some information, but until I actually do something with that, like I'm not a cabin builder. I've watched a YouTube video about cabin building.
Sure.
Right? I think that's just there's a big difference there, to actually be a practitioner of something or just to be an observer, And I think we even talked that way about following Jesus, like do you actually follow Jesus? Do you actually listen to his voice? Are you actually like going where he's going, or do you follow him like you follow somebody on social media? Just at a distance, like check in and be like, oh, wonder what he's doing. Wonder what he's, and then be like, okay, cool. Now what did everybody else say?
Right. Even to have that kind of vibe of like, oh, that's interesting. Like you hear something that Jesus said, it's like, oh, well, that's an interesting idea. Interesting thought.
Yep.
But that doesn't really come and live with you.
Exactly.
Shape how you're being in the world. I think too, the other thing about learning, and this is something that, I guess I'd be curious to know how in different fields they try and put this into place, but they say, the best way to learn, the most effective learning that you ever do is when you teach.
Yeah.
Which feels really, like, ironic, like, if you're trying to be a learner, normally I'm not thinking I should teach. Normally I'm thinking, like, well, no, I'm not in the place to teach yet. Like, I'm just a learner. But really, if you want to learn something, they say that is the best way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, after church on Sunday, I said to a guy, an older man that had connections to Michigan Tech. I thought at some point he had been a professor, so in my sermon I talked about like I told people to think of who their favorite teacher was, and so I just went up to him and jokingly said, if I had ever had you for a teacher, you would have been my favorite. And he goes, I never taught. I was in research my whole career. I said, oh. But you still taught people. So I said, but I bet you still taught people things along the way. And he goes, well, yeah, of course, like, but more on like one-on-one situations, like teaching skills or so. Yeah, I mean, even though he was in research, it wasn't just gathering information. He had interns and student workers, and you're always, you're taking what you're learning and teaching somebody else how to do that thing. The more that I think about this, the more I'm like, well, of course. Discipleship in Christianity. Why would we not? Like, why is that not a big intentional piece of what the church is? And I think we're trying to make it more. I mean, that's what Jesus did, and that's how the church grew and the church spread, was disciples who made disciples.
Yeah. Well, there was a phrase you used there too, like when you were getting on that notion of why wouldn't we do this as well? Which was this idea of practicing your faith or practicing your Christianity.
Yeah.
And there are some people who talk that way even. This is what struck me when you said it, is like you talk to some people about, what they believe or what they're connected to, and some people are like, oh, I practice, practice Methodism or I practice Catholicism. And
people talk about that with like yoga. I mean, I think even
sure.
in other places, like I think that's even what they call yoga. Like yoga is it's a practice. It's a practice.
Yeah. And I remember that used to like strike me weird when someone was talking about practicing Christianity, and it's kind of like, well, that seems like a weird phrase. Aren't you just a Christian?
Yeah.
But really, like the way they're talking about it is kind of more what we'd like to step into, which is that like it's an active thing.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, there's something about identity, right? Like to have the label Christian, that's good. Right. This is my identity. It's who I am.
Right. Well, and okay. So, in theological terms, we talk in Lutheranism, we use the words that are used in the scriptures of justification and sanctification. So, justification being our relationship with God, that we are justified by grace through faith on account of Christ alone. That we are forgiven and set free. That is totally passive. We can't do anything to earn it. He gives it. We don't merit it. And I think that's where Lutheran Christians are very comfortable, because I mean, just historically, if you think about it, Luther had to make. I mean, that was the point of the Reformation,
right?
Catholicism was saying, "No, pay your way. Do your works, penance, indulgences, do all this stuff, So Luther said, no, that like Paul speaks about justification by grace through faith.
Yeah.
You know, so and not just Paul, but the whole scriptures. So I think that's where our tradition defaults to.
Right.
It's not bad at all, because salvation is what we need eternally.
And it's really step one, right? You don't get to sanctification without justification.
Right.
You're not going to go do and be a good Christian unless you understand that what has been done for you already came completely outside of yourself.
Absolutely.
Like it wasn't you, it was God. Yeah.
So, I'll just cut that out, I guess. Where are we at? How far into this thing? Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Justification comes before sanctification, but this is where our denomination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we still cutting this out?
I
or
think
are
so.
you wrapping stuff up?
No.
Were you talking? I think you were talking.
I don't think so. Or was I?
You said you can't.
You have to have this before that.
Yeah.
And then I think we're just like agreeing basically with that notion.
So then sanctification is then what we would say the process of being made holy, you know? Mm-hmm. So sanctification comes from the word sanctus in Latin, meaning holy.
And holy
and then holy means set apart.
So you look different.
Set apart for a specific purpose.
Right.
So as a justified person, somebody who's received justification by grace through faith, then we're set apart from the world to act and be and look differently, which is it's living like a Christian. What is living like a Christian? Living like a disciple. What's a disciple doing? Learning, making more disciples, being like Jesus, following Jesus. So kind of bringing all that back full circle, like again, I think just in our tradition, we wrestle, and I've always wrestled too with anything that feels like action, like I have to do something.
Yeah, right.
And it seems like sometimes our theology pushes back against that. Like, no, you don't have to do anything. Jesus did it for you.
Right.
True, in terms of salvation.
Right.
But in terms of our relationship with the world and our neighbors' needs, they need us to live like Christ, so that they can also be justified. Right. So how will they hear if nobody speaks? Right.
Yeah.
I just did chapel with our preschool kids here, and I read the story of the Good Samaritan. Why does Jesus tell the story of the Good Samaritan? Who's my neighbor? Right?
The one who did something for this guy.
Right.
And I was just thinking of that story because, lest anyone hear this and think that, that this isn't something that Jesus would condone, right? Going out and being, and doing. Yeah, the story of the Good Samaritan is you have the people who would be considered the justified ones. Yeah. The priest and the Levite, like those would be the ones who you'd think, oh, of course they're right with God.
Yeah.
But here they are, totally ignoring this great need right in front of their face. So Jesus clearly is saying, well, of course, be justified. Know that, I am your neighbor. Know that I am the one who laid down my life for you, right?
Yes.
To be saved. But then, let that work in you what it wants to, which is to spread that, to share that.
Right. And, in our understanding of the scriptures, you're never going to be apart from that justification. Mm-hmm. Okay, Christ will always that is always yours. So you're never going to be apart from it, but you will also never be perfectly sanctified. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to end up to be a perfect person. It's this kind of work in progress, but it's not like an ascent to some sort of higher status in relationship with Jesus, or some sort of higher status in heaven. Like we don't do activity in order to get something in return ourselves. We simply give to the world like Jesus gives to the world, not expecting anything in return, because we don't need anything in return, because we already have everything because we're justified.
Yeah, right, right, exactly.
So,
and I think it's helpful to remember that, like we will never reach any sort of perfect sanctification. Like, to me, hearing that is also useful when I think I'm not ready to go do this, look at my life,
If I just get a little bit better,
then maybe I'll be ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the reality is, Jesus kind of is saying, to anyone who has been justified, which is all of you listening.
Right.
Which is, it's anyone who comes to Jesus and accepts what he has to offer, which is his forgiveness. He's saying to all of those people, yeah, you're ready, man. You have what it takes because you have me.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, Kevin, you and I would even admit, we grew up in the church. Our dads are pastors. We've got this story, same kind of similar path, right?
Right.
Went to the seminary, learned to be pastors, and all this stuff. Sometimes I still get to the place where I look at my own life and I'm like, man, there are people in this church who I think know the Bible better than I do.
Sure, yeah.
There are people that I feel like are living Christian lives that look better than my life, And so, we all do this kind of comparison tactic and think
right.
I mean, and that's just Satan at work saying, "Oh yeah, you must not be a child of God." Yeah.
Right.
Just go right to that core identity. Just not good enough. Not quite.
Mm-hmm.
Keep working on it. And then it may, and it's like, if we cling to that justification, if we cling to the baptism, that baptismal grace that we believe in,
right.
that God does that work of claiming us and choosing us and redeeming us and giving us new life, and speaking his word that is authoritative into our lives to make us alive in his name, it's sending his Holy Spirit onto us, the Almighty God who speaks and stuff appears. That is the God who lives in you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every one of you. I mean, it's just
of course you're capable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's anyone who wouldn't want us to go out and spread this news, right, or spread this hope that we have, it would be the devil, right? That's kind of his goal, is to keep as many kind of in his camp as he can, to have more people just unaware of the freedom, the forgiveness that we have in Christ. And I think the other piece of having maybe a checkered story, or a life that's not that we feel it's not good enough. No, actually, all of those spots where you feel like you aren't good enough, those all become opportunities to speak to the grace that you know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, in all of those, if you didn't have that, you'd almost be a worse witness.
Yeah.
Because then the next guy you talk to is going to think, well, I'll never be like you.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, well, look, I got this junk going on, but I also know that, there's a God who's forgiven me.
And that's the way that the Apostle Paul did ministry, right? I am, chief of sinners, right?
Right.
I'm the worst among the sinners.
Yeah.
Right? If Jesus could choose me and work through me and change my life,
why not?
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Now let's speak particularly about making disciples, though.
Okay.
So you have started putting some of this into practice in your own life in an intentional way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't want to undermine the fact that we do make disciples kind of the whole congregation.
Sure. Just
even through this podcast. You guys, you're learning along with us.
Right.
But there is something for all of us as just it's individual Christians, that command of Jesus to make a couple disciples, intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been doing that with a couple of people, right?
Yep.
I guess just the blanket kind of wide open question, what have been any of the kind of joys or challenges of in that process for you?
Yeah. So I would say, just to back it up too and give a little context, all of this discipleship language for me is fairly new, right? So this wasn't something that I, like you said, is part of our tradition. It's just not something that's on the forefront of it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Trying to live it out and the accountability piece of walking with somebody, specifically about, hey, how's it going? How's the Christian walk going? So this is all kind of new for me, and so stepping into it, I definitely had some of those feelings like, wow, I'm not ready to do this. But yeah, what you learn is it's really not overcomplicated, because all it is you and another Christian walking together and sharing the joys and challenges of your own lives and your own attempts to, listen to Jesus and embody him. So one of the joys for me, which was actually reciprocated by one of I'm still getting used to the disciple language, but one of my disciples, right?
And I know that feels weird to say, but a person that I'm teaching, right, walking with,
was just the depth of kind of relationship that gets formed when you walk like this with people, right? Because I'm assuming you have all sorts of friends, listeners at home. I don't know. I have all sorts of friends where like we don't get super deep in conversation, and it's guys I've known my whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe once in a decade around a campfire, real late, we'll say it, and then finally people like open up.
Yeah.
But like the point of these discipleship relationships, like you don't have to go very far when you're talking about, trying to model Jesus or how he's impacting your life to get to, how's things going with your wife?
Yeah.
How's things going with your family? Yeah. I mean, these are like the significant things of your life that really matter.
Yeah.
But maybe we don't find space to talk about them.
Yeah.
So one of the joys, has really been just kind of the closeness that you feel with a person in walking with them spiritually in this way. And it's on both sides. So like, one of my disciples has kind of shared, just where he's at in his marriage, and some challenges there, and it gives me opportunity to say, hey man, I'm there too. Like, and he's good about asking me as well, like, how's it going for you? And, so I would say definitely one of the joys is just that the closeness that you bond with another Christian, and you really feel that brotherhood or maybe that sisterhood in a deep way that we talk about being in the faith. One challenge I would say though is it's kind of reminding yourself, and this you really start to at least feel like you get how Jesus must have felt a few times, and that's the slowness of the discipleship process.
Yeah.
Right, so Jesus spent 3 years with these guys, in the Bible, and of course they all flee when he's like at the most critical moment.
Yeah, right.
And for myself too, it's not only like you have hopes and goals, right, for those who you're discipling, because there's kind of this recognition that, okay, maybe there's a little more depth of faith, or like I have a little more experience and I can impart that and share that with you, and I want to see you like make a stride here or there.
Yeah.
And it's tough and it's slow going, especially when it comes to, just habitual ways about yourself you're trying to change. Because you realize God's saying, look, dude, that's not good for you.
Right.
Like, change this. That's a joy to hear anyone say that acknowledgement, but then to actually start living it out, it's slow. And but I've also realized, there's slowness even for me in I don't know, even in my own way of discipling. Like, I'm new to this, and so like I think over time I'll feel a little bit more adept and more like, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing now.
Right.
But that's life with people, right?
Right.
Like, it's a little slow, and it's a patient walk.
Well, I know that too. I mean, when I started this process myself, in 2016, I think I got the initial kind of same homework that Dr. Kim likes to give out to people. Like, we'll start discipling 3 people, and I'm like, I got a whole church. Like, I don't know I don't even know how to, like, I don't know how to do it, any of this, so it took me probably 2 years, 3 years maybe, to even just like kind of start to figure out what this meant, the way that I would do it, everything. I mean, Bryant admitted on the podcast last week that he and I worked together for 2 or 3 years before he ever started like kind of reciprocating that. So like, I mean, sometimes it takes off, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, that's just the way it goes, I mean, but I think there is something about specifically praying that God that we would desire to do the Great Commission. Like, you either desire to do what Jesus has asked you to do, or you don't. Like, but I mean, that's kind of again, not in terms of salvation.
Right.
You are saved, but in terms of what Jesus has asked you to do in this world. Like, you're either going to do it or you're not. Like, I mean, there's not really an in-between.
Oh, and when we call him Lord too, right?
I know.
Like, that's something that, it's another word like disciple for me, where I'm like, oh, I don't really use that ever. What does that mean? I was like, oh, shoot, that means, like, it's not just that you're suggesting this for me, like, you're commanding this of me, right? Yeah.
And Jesus only commands what's good for us.
Right.
And that's something to come to grips with too, to trust him enough to, when he says, do this, that it's actually good.
Yeah.
Like, that he's a loving Lord, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so again, pray specifically. I desire to do the Great Commission, Jesus. I desire to make disciples. Teach me how, you know?
Yeah.
Give me somebody to disciple me. Provide that. Let me see the opportunities. Let me ask somebody. You know, let me see the people around me that either don't know Jesus or know him a little bit and need to, walk maturely, and invite them into a conversation. And I think you'll be amazed what God will do,
For sure.
That specificity of the prayer, it changes your perspective on what God is doing around you. So
totally. Yeah, and it's exciting. I mean, really, in like you said, Jesus wants what's good for you, and even this discipleship, journey with people. Like, already I've experienced, and this is in short spans of time. Like this closeness with people, and the one real joy I'm longing for is, we talk about in discipleship, not only walking with other Christians that we know, but then part of it becomes, God opened my eyes to people who have never even heard about you, or have heard but have no idea who you are. And then we kind of hold each other accountable as disciples and disciple makers. Like, let's be doing that as well. And that's like, to have that experience of like watching someone come to know who Jesus is, and understand that they're forgiven and free. And sometimes we relearn that along the way too. And that's just as, exciting to watch. But yeah, I think when you talk about Jesus wanting what's best for us, man, I just think that would be something in life that's got eternal value, what else can you do in your life that's going to have an impact of that longevity,
right?
Right. So anyways,
awesome
discipleship.
Yeah, good stuff. Go and be disciples and disciple makers, and again, like, those of you listening, if you don't know who to ask to disciple you, let us know. We know some people, and we've worked with some people, and I think we could get some relationships built out and some groups to make this an intentional part of being. So if any of you live at a distance and don't live locally, I'm planning on starting an online discipleship group coming up in I don't know when. I'm still working on developing that, but in the next couple of months for sure. So let me know. We'd be happy to do that with you. So Kevin, as always, it's been good to conversate with you, and have a blessed rest of your day.
You too, brother.